You've just landed inside Launch Street, the Innovation Podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate and differentiate and get further, faster in this crazy, cluttered world. And now, innovation thought leader and your Superfly host, Tamara Kleinberg.
Tamara here, your host and person with a dragonfly Lake Tahoe tattoo. It's my favorite ink. If you see me at the airport, say hi. You'll know me by my ink. Do you know what I find funny? I find it funny that we talk about employee engagement. That's kind of the big buzzword, yet no one ever says, I feel so engaged today about their work. That disconnect between what we focus on and how we actually talk about work got me wondering about how do you engage employees when that's not when we as people look at our jobs? So with that question in mind, I asked Cathy Brown, Director of Engage for Success, to join me on Inside Launch Street to talk about her perspective that engagement is actually a social movement, not a definition, and why fitting in is actually killing your leadership and innovation efforts, and why bringing your whole self to work should be your number one engagement priority. Okay, it's go time. Cathy, thank you so much for joining me today.
A real pleasure, Tamara. Good to speak to you.
Well, I'm looking forward to digging in, but let's start with you. What's the one thing people would be absolutely surprised to learn about you?
Well, I am a moristunsa. And for those of you not based in the UK, that is our English traditional form of dance with bells and handkerchiefs and big sticks and all sorts of things. So I go out all through the year and we dance in public places and pubs and fetes and churches and all sorts of places to entertain the public.
Wait, I'm almost a little bit speechless because I haven't heard this one before. When you say you go and you do dancing, like what does it actually look like?
So people's traditional view of it is men dressed in white with colourful ribbons, bells usually on their legs and handkerchiefs or sometimes sticks. We dance in 8s or 6s, sort of groups of, and it's set figures so that you've got particular types of dances that anybody who's into morris dancing would recognise that you were doing a particular dance. But it's actually broadened out a lot in recent years. So now you have women's sides and mixed sides, and we have a group of men, a group of women. We do dances together, we do dances separately, and we do clog dancing as well, although I don't clog. That's a little difficult for me. But it's very, very traditional, very English.
Well, that is fantastic. And I feel like dancing is a great starting point to get into engagement. So, which is what you focus on in your thought leadership. I want to start actually with engagement's kind of a big word. So how do you define it, particularly when it comes to the role that you play in of employee engagement?
Yeah, well, I always think it's a really interesting question. So the organisation that I lead is called Engage for Success, and we are a social movement, and we are very much an umbrella organisation. So we can say we don't need to stick a stake in the ground and define engagement. We can say we accept all of the definitions that are out there, and there are many, many definitions of engagement. And generally, you'll find that they have similar characteristics. So they will often be about loyalty or commitment either to a cause or an organisation. There will definitely be generally a sense of it being beneficial to the well-being of the employee. And there's generally a sense of an engaged employee or an employee working in an engaging environment, being able to be their whole selves at work. So generally, regardless of the individual definition for an organisation, we tend to find that those characteristics are included within an organisational definition of engagement. But the other point I find really interesting is, of course, when you think of it as an individual, somebody who works, we don't say engaged. We don't bounce in the morning and go, do you know what, I feel really engaged this morning.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we say, I love my job, or flipping hell, we got some really great stuff done today, or, you know, whatever it is, we express it in human language. So other than for the purposes of actually measuring it within an organisation, I'm slightly dubious about how useful it is to pin down a definition of engagement anyway.
I want to touch on something you just said because I think it's really important, and we kind of went quickly, but for launch shooters out there, you said something about bringing your whole selves to work.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And I think more importantly, actually, my question is, what does that look like? How do I know if I'm in that place or the people around me are in that place?
Absolutely. And I mean, it touches on a number of the aspects of engagement anyway. So if you have people working with you or working for you, one of the things that you should be doing in terms of creating an engaging environment is getting to know them in some way. And we're not all great extroverts that can talk to people, but just that simple human connection of finding out things about people enables you to tell how true to themselves they are being, or whether they're holding stuff back because they don't feel perhaps that it's welcome. I'll give you a purely individual case of my own case. So when I'm able to bring my whole self to work, I dye my hair ridiculous colours. I've got a very senior job. It's an executive job. I deal with, the public all the time. I'm out on conference platforms representing my organisation. But my hair could be green. It could be turquoise. It could be orange. It changes a lot. And, the people that I work with and for and my boss accept that that's part of me, that if I'm forced into a scenario where my hair is looking very dull and, corporate scenario, whatever else, I don't bring my full self to work. I'm not engaged. You don't get the whole of me. And the whole of me is much more worth having there than just a bit of me, I can assure you.
It's so interesting to say that about the hair. I used to go by these red 3-piece power suits to try to be something that I wasn't. I have purple in my hair, and I wear crazy clothes much of the time. And but there was this moment in time, right, where I was just trying so hard to be quote unquote professional, and it wasn't the real me. And it is amazing how that, I think what you're saying here is it seeps into everything. So you're not bringing your best to everything you do because you're holding back.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's the culture that we're in, and we're so institutionalized to it that we don't even realize that we're doing it sometimes. So we had a super speaker come to talk to us last week, and she was telling us the story of where she used to work. She worked in a very big call center environment, and all of the culture around there, the management culture was very hard, it was very logical, it was very numbers driven, and she was having real problems. She got a great promotion, based on the work that she'd done, but she was deeply unhappy. And it sort of finally reached a point where she went to her boss and said, why am I even here on the planet? None of this is making any sense to me. And he sent her off to a coach. And actually the coaching enabled her to realize that she was a very emotionally led leader. So she was trying to force herself down a style of leadership that was utterly alien to her personality and how her natural leadership style was. And she came back and she was just like, I'm going to do it my way. And she had a supportive organisation that allowed her to do it her way. And it was hugely successful. And she managed to institute huge culture change within that organisation by being herself, by understanding how she needed to operate within that organisation to be effective.
I'm so thankful that you started off with a very one-on-one personal example. I think oftentimes with this type of topic of employee engagement, we try to go too big too quickly, and we forget that at the end of the day, this is really just about us, people, and kind of how we're showing up to work in our, it's funny, engagement, how much we love work is really what we're saying. I want to kind of take that and talk about it from I want to elevate it up from to a grander scale too. I think the last stats I read were something like, and I might have them a little bit wrong, but they're crazy high. It was something like 71% of employees, I think it was US, UK, feel disengaged. So I guess I want to ask, how do we get it so wrong to start? Well, why is this or how do we know if we're getting it wrong? Why is this such a hard thing for us to figure out?
It is hard for us to figure out, absolutely. The figures aren't quite right there. It's less 71% disengaged. It's 71% not engaged generally. So you have about 30% of people who are engaged. They're probably like you and me. It's like, yes, I love my job. Right. Fantastic. You've then got about 30% roughly in the middle who are showing up. They're okay. They're probably thinking, well, do you know what works all right? I see my mates, I pay the mortgage, it's okay. And then you've got probably about 30% that actively are disengaged, and they potentially are making themselves ill. They obviously have an impact on the people around them. They're very likely to be unproductive. They may even be sort of quite toxic behaviour within their part of the organisation that obviously they foster. So generally a third is the split that we see across the UK, across the US. It's all quite similar. And the problem, I think, is that we actually don't know what to do. So you won't find many organisations or leaders that will say, engagement, I'm not having any of that. Nobody will come out and say that. And all of the evidence that is out there, and there's a lot of it, tells us that an engaging environment is a healthy, productive environment that will add to your bottom line by far. But the problem is, I think, because it's people, it's hard and we don't know what to do. It's as simple as that. I really do.
What do you think are some of the characteristics of high-performing companies or even teams? It doesn't have to be big. I know you had mentioned something about those 4 enablers that you have or that you talk about. So I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, sure. So this comes from our history as an organisation. So we were started as the result of a report that was requested by the UK government 10 years ago now, in fact. And our founders, MacLeod and Nita Clarke, did this huge, wide-ranging piece of research that is still available, Engaging for Success, it's called. And they were asked to address a number of questions. So is engagement a real, tangible thing? If we agree that it is there evidence out there to prove that and to prove that it's beneficial? And if so, what are people doing about it? And so the report came out and said, yeah, absolutely, it's real. There's loads of evidence. It's beneficial for organisations and for people. But the general conclusion is people don't know what to do. And they identified 4 characteristics that are present in organisations that have high engagement and high performance. Because it's not just about people being happy at work. It absolutely is about business performance. And so these 4 characteristics you will see in organisations that have both of those things, highly engaged, high performing. And the first one is that there's a story, a strategic narrative for the organisation that is a living, breathing story. It's not the dry CEO, with a video once a year going, this is what we're doing. It's the knowledge of that story and where you fit in it as an employee, how you emotionally connect to it is really important. One of the things that leaders do when they come into an organisation sometimes is they try and wipe out the history of the leaders before them. And it's, your staff have lived through that and they will not take kindly to you say, even when it's bad. We lived through that as employees. It's a part of our DNA as an organisation. So it's really important that you acknowledge the history, the future, the present, and that people feel connected to it. So that's the first one.
Let me ask you a quick question on that before we keep going, because I'm curious about the bad. I think what you said just totally hit home, because I've been through that, where a new leadership comes in and suddenly they want to wipe the slate clean and do it all differently and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh my God, I've been here for 5 years and this is a part of now what? What do you do with the bad? Do you keep it and weave it in? Do you acknowledge it? Do you, how does that, I hear you and I think I agree with you, right? That you can't just wipe it clean, but what do you do with it so that engagement and that excitement stays? Yeah,
you have to learn from it. Exactly as we do with bad things that happen to us in life, bad things that happen to us as a tribe of people together in an organisation, it's just the same. You learn from it, you accept it and move on, you try and change it and move on, however it is, but you learn from it, you make it different next time.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so that was the first one with story and narrative. What are the other 3?
Engaging managers. So we've already touched a little bit on this, but engaging managers essentially do 3 things well. They can focus you on the task and they give you the gist of it. They ask you to deliver it and they let you do it. They trust you to get on with it. They don't micromanage you. So they trust you to deliver in your way. They treat you as an individual, which is hugely important. You're not just a cog in a machine. And also they are very good at dealing not only with your good behaviour, and so they can acknowledge and reward good behaviour, but they deal constructively with dysfunctional behaviour quickly and constructively so that, again, it doesn't impact. So you deal with things quickly before they become huge issues, either personally or within the organisation. So 3 things there that engaging managers do well. And one of the problems is we know all that. That's pretty basic. Yeah, but we don't do it. We don't train people when we give them management responsibility, and those things don't come naturally necessarily at all. Management is a skill that needs to be trained, and we're very bad at doing that.
I think sometimes too, and tell me what you find with your clients, that the hardest part, at least it certainly has for me, and I've had to learn through this, is treating people like individuals, which sounds obvious, like duh, Tamara, when I say it out loud. But, you've got performance reviews and you've got levels of standards and expectations, and like your kids, right? I don't treat my kids the same because they're two very different kids. So why would I treat my employees the same? But it's hard. It's weird to me.
Let me give you a really quick example. So one of our big retail chains had a failing store, and good management practice, they put somebody in from a successful store to see if they could turn it around. And they started to see improved sales figures actually within a couple of days, which was obviously they weren't expecting it to turn around that quickly. So they went in and they said to him, "What have you done?" And he said, "I'm doing my job. I'm not doing anything different to what I've always done." So they came in and they chatted him for a little while to see, obviously, if they could work out what he was doing and bottle that and share it around, share the good practice. And they realised that actually within a couple of days, in a pretty large retail store, so they got retail and they got warehousing and they got logistics, about 700 staff, I think. Within a couple of days, he'd learnt everybody's name. And it was as simple as that. He was using their names.
Wow.
And that's what we mean. Take the time to find out somebody's name. Simple as that.
So simple. Okay, that's fantastic advice. I mean, I think too, when you work in an organization, you pass people in the hallways all the time. You may not work with them directly, but you never even catch their name. You just say hi because you see them. Like, how great would it be if you were like, "Hey, Cathy."
Yeah, exactly. It's not hard. It's just treating people as human beings.
Yeah, great. What are the other two?
So next one is employee voice, hugely important. And this isn't about internal comms. This is around the how people feel about giving you their view. So is their view sought? Do you want it to start off with? Because obviously if you don't want it, then nothing is more annoying. Is it welcomed? Is it acted upon or acknowledged? Don't have to do everything, but are you giving people the opportunity to give you their view and to help and to fix things? They're the ones on the ground. They know how to fix things that are going wrong. But do they feel psychologically safe in giving you that view is another really important part of that. And it's not two-way, it's multi-way. It's up and down within the organisation. It's side to side. Is there free-flowing ability for people to tell you how they feel? So employee voice.
Do you find that, I think in innovation, in the space that I play in, this is particularly true where people will say, or leaders will say, "I want your voice." They'll collect their voice. And then it goes into the black hole. And that almost makes it worse on the back end because then they're like, why bother, right? I mean, I think what you're saying is kind of the same thing, right?
Yep. And any employment engagement surveys that people do, same principle. So there has to be that acknowledgement. As I said, you don't have to do everything that people are telling you, but you need to tell them what you are doing and what you aren't doing and perhaps why you aren't doing something. We don't work in democracies, that's fine. But, the basic, again, human acknowledgement that somebody has bothered enough to give you their view on something, is the minimum that you should be doing.
Well, Cathy, I think what you said there, just to pause for a second, is so important for launch readers to hear, which is you don't have to go with what they said, but you've got to explain to them what happened with the information and why you're doing what you're doing. And it's as simple as that.
Sometimes that can generate the next iteration of whatever that idea was, which is the whole point of innovation anyway.
That's exactly true. So now we've got one more, right?
Yep. Last one, which is organizational integrity. And this is around trust. So most of us work in organizations where we've got at least some understanding of how we're expected to behave and how it feels to work around there. And that might be, the nice shiny posters on the walls in the big corporate with the values on. It might be as simple as an implicit understanding of this is how we work around here. But we all have that understanding of values and behaviors that are expected of us. But if the behavior that we see is actually not congruent with those values, then we distrust. And engagement will not flourish in that atmosphere of distrust. It's like when your boss is on the news saying, well, our people are our greatest asset, but actually you've got a massive culture of bullying and harassment and that sort of thing. So it's not true. And so it's that. There needs to be trust that the behavior that is seen is congruent with the values that are espoused.
It's I'm smiling. I'm trying not to laugh hard as you're saying that, because I think lately, as we've watched the media, it becomes very clear that everything that we're doing inside organizations in today's world is very transparent. The good, bad, and ugly are out there. So if you're not working and living in integrity in your companies, it becomes very apparent to a lot of people very quick.
Absolutely. I mean, things like Glassdoor are fascinating for that. And, it puts engagement at a really different place in the business life cycle. So we think of engagement as something that we do to employees who already work for us. And there are two problems with that. So first of all, we think of it as something we do to people, which is a horrible attitude, but that is how it's seen. And then the fact that we think of it only as something that we do to people who already work for us. Something like Glassdoor, where your employees can go on and tell everybody else what it's like to work for your organisation. What do you think people who are looking for jobs are doing? They're going onto Glassdoor and they're reading what your current employees say about how they feel to work for you.
Right.
That means that engagement starts before they've even thought, shall I work for that company? You need positive advocates in your staff, because if they aren't happy, then you're not going to attract anybody else either.
Before I ask my next question, I just want to say, with that research paper that you referenced, can we find that on your website? I can get the link from you later and put it in the show notes. I just wanted to know if it was available to people.
It is indeed.
Okay, great. Indeed. I'll get the link from you later, and we'll make sure, Launch Streeters, that we put it in our show notes for you, because I've actually read part of it because I had it, but I wasn't sure if it was on the site. So, okay, good. Yeah. Excellent. It's fantastic. So I want to dig into the first one, which was the whole story narrative. You said something in a video that I watched about engagement that really struck me. You said that what's important is that how are employees involved in your story, which is very different than employees and your team knowing your story, maybe even being able to articulate your story, which is, I think, where a lot of people stop. So tell me what you mean by involved in your story. And if you have an example that brings that to life, I think that would be helpful here. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, a personal example. So the story part of it is where we create purpose and meaning for ourselves at work. And, if we aren't involved in that story, if it's just something that's bypassing us and we know of it, we don't create that purpose and meaning. And it's really hugely important that we do. So, about, 15, 20 years ago, I was working in IT, and I was capacity planning mainframes, which is about as far from an actual customer as you could be. So I was working for a telecommunications company. So, not talking to real customers in any way at all, capacity managing the big machines that were driving all of the customer service systems. And at the time, our sort of, I suppose, internal and external marketing message, and it was really integral to the company, was it's good to talk. Now, superb as a marketing slogan, that's lovely, but it works really well internally in the sense of that story as well, because even in the depths of the IT organization, I can say to myself, I know why I'm here. It's good to talk. That makes, it's got a real emotional hook, and I can understand and make purpose and meaning of that for myself. And obviously, as things happen, changes at the top, and the new strategy was rolled out, and they took away it's good to talk, and we had let's roll out super fast broadband. And commercially, I'm sure that's very, very sensible and a great strategy, but it has no emotional impact whatsoever. It doesn't tell me why I'm there as an employee, and that's what you need. That's what a good strategic narrative does for you. It tells you why you're there.
Do you think your employees, whether you're big or small here, help you move the narrative forward, or are they there to just simply live out the narrative? If that question makes sense.
Oh no, absolutely, they help. That's a key part of it. And organisations, I think, that don't involve their staff in informing that narrative, informing strategy for the organisation, are really missing a trick. Because, it's your staff who will know how to move things on and how to make things better, sometimes much better than you will. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I will tell you that I find, especially with the larger companies, if you're out there, Launch Streeters, listening, and you're trying to change the game inside and you're in a bigger company, I will tell you it is the frontline staff who are with your customers day in and day out. They probably get paid the least, right, and valued the least, with the highest turnover, yet they're the ones that have a lot of the information.
Absolutely.
So you call this a social movement. You said it in the beginning, and I wrote down to ask you about that. Why do you call it a movement, not, a skill, a consulting, whatever else you could call it?
Yep. This is around us as Engaged for Success. So we are not a government organisation. We're not a commercial organisation. So we don't consult, that type of thing. And this comes from, again, that government report that I originally referenced. So our founders, when they were asked, what would you do then to change this situation that we know engagement is a good thing, it's good for business, but nobody does it. And they said, we want to get together all of the people in the organisations that contributed to that report, who are hugely passionate about this topic, about building better working places for people, and we want people's energy together. We want to share all the good practice that's out there. We want to raise awareness about the benefits of employee engagement. And we want to do that in a not-for-profit way. So, for instance, the website is completely free to access. We don't charge for any content. We bring together a huge amount of research and case studies and all the rest of it, and all of it is freely available. And the point is it grows and through the energy of the volunteers that are involved with it. So it absolutely is a movement and not an organisation.
That's great to think of it that way. I mean, it kind of just makes me envision a ripple effect so much greater than just the direct team that you're working with.
Absolutely right.
I want to just really quickly loop back to the whole 30-30-30 of, engaged, not engaged, disengaged. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the middle group, they're kind of gnawing at me right now because I get the totally engaged. Oh my God, I love work. Monday is amazing. Like I get them, right? That's me. I get it. I get I hate my job. Every time I post on Facebook, it's something super snarky. Totally understand them. Like I get their toxicity and all that for them and for the people around them. But I have to imagine that group in the middle in some ways is almost harder because you don't always see it and their impact is just as great, isn't it? So I would love your thoughts on that middle group because they're the ones that are almost indifferent, that not me, because I feel like, I've had those people on my team and I look at them and I go, oh, you could be and do so much more.
They're really interesting. And there's been very little direct research into that group until relatively recently. So we've been working on some that will be released in the new year. And the early insights from that, what it's showing us is that that group are fascinating, Tamara. They really, really are. So what you tend to get is if they've got a positive team environment, but they've got quite reactive behaviour, you'll find that they'll probably self-identify as engaged because they'll say, yeah, I'm happy, it's all good. But when you actually look at what they're doing as a team, they're doing things like stretching their work out to fit the day. They're not proactively going and seeking more work to do or proactively problem solving or anything else. They've been together quite a while, so they're probably socially quite connected, but none of it's pushing anything forward. So they're just kind of contented, really. And we would not call them engaged because then that extra effort isn't there, that discretionary effort. There's a big loyalty to the brand or to the organisation probably isn't there either. They're just kind of marking time, really. And you would deal with them in a different way to another group of people that also sit in the middle, where they've got very proactive behaviours, but they've got a negative team climate. And what they're doing is they're all individually engaged. So there's no sense of teamwork at all or anything like. They're all managing up. They're making themselves look good.
We've all worked with that person.
Haven't we just?
Yeah.
And those two things are two elements that sit in that middle space that actually the solutions for dealing with are probably quite different. But the more that you get insight into why teams are behaving that way, and these are teams potentially within the same division of organisation, so everything else around them is the same. So how do you then go in and change up those environments so that you just nudge them into either the more positive behaviours or the more, the less self-oriented worldview. And so having more understanding is key to moving that big clump of 30% in a different direction. And that's what you want to do. You want to move them obviously up the chain towards that more engaged state.
I bet when that research is done on the middle, because I've seen a lot on both ends of the spectrum, but I bet you it'll show that there's an incredible negative impact to the bottom line to having a large middle group that's not giving you their best. And in fact, I would say that it kind of leads into my next question. That group is not bringing that innovative thinking. They're not looking for creative solutions. So how does having employee engagement, employees that come in loving work, how does that make them also more innovative employees?
Yeah, there's a clear connection, and a lot of it is around that element of being not even allowed to have your own space, but that assumption that you are there to do your best, and that you don't have to ask permission to do everything. I mean, that's an indicator of a very engaged environment that corresponds directly with how people work in an innovative way. We did, several years ago now, but again available on the website, the 4 enablers of engagement that I talk about, we mapped to 8 enablers of innovation. So each of those 4 things has 2 particular elements that are directly related to how innovative innovative a team is. And there's a little diagnostic tool that goes with that as well. So I would suggest people go and see that. But there's a clear relationship between, again, that authenticity and being able to be yourself and the creative freedom that then allows you to innovate within your job.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I would, add to it and say that I think part of being innovative is also being vulnerable. You got to be willing to put your ideas out there. You got to be willing to take some risks. You got to be willing to throw stuff out there that may not work, right? Which is hard.
Yeah. That's the whole point. But if you don't have a learning environment, if, for instance, again, in that sort of slightly pseudo engagement space, you might well have a blame culture going, and that will kill innovation stone dead.
No, you're right. And to flip it for a second, if I'm the one building the company, how does a culture of innovation contribute to engagement levels? I'm trying to keep my employees engaged. So how does having kind of innovation at the core of that help?
Virtuous circle. We find this with well-being as well. So increases in well-being will drive increases in engagement, will drive increases in well-being, and it happens exactly the same with innovation. If staff are engaged, they'll innovate more. If they're being more innovative and they feel that creative freedom, they'll be more engaged. So it's a lovely virtuous circle of the two building on each other.
I just want to take a pause because I love how you just said that, creative freedom. So for launch readers out there, listen to that and ask yourself if you have and are creating a space for creativity, for innovation in your workplaces, because everybody's happier moving forward, and not in just the, as you said in the beginning, not just in the soft way, but also in a way that impacts the bottom line.
Yeah.
So you took the IQE, our assessment, before, and I always love when I know the results because then I can listen to the language that you use. And your innovator archetype is instinctual risk taker. So what I'm curious is, how do you think being able to intuitively connect dots in new and meaningful ways, having that circuitous thinking pattern, that's the instinctual, and that being willing to get and go to uncomfortable places, that's the risk taker. I'm curious how that helps you in your work and what you do and what your clients get out of it.
Yeah. Well, for me, in my current role, my involvement with Engage for Success, which has been going about 6 years now, it fits really well. So, a social movement is perhaps inherently fairly uncertain and ambiguous, and I deal very well with that. I work very well in an ambiguous environment. So those particular elements, I think, really help me to connect with multiple people. So we're a volunteer organisation, and people are coming to us with all sorts of reasons and agendas and passions for being with us, and I need to somehow engage them all in a particular direction and make more of the movement. So I think the willingness to not need a set structure is probably really useful. But interestingly, I was reminded of my role before the one I have now, where I was actually an internal auditor, which obviously is completely different.
I wouldn't have expected that either.
Yeah. But I was, both of those things describe exactly how I was as an auditor. So I was not a sort of very detailed checkbox, how does this work, are you doing it?
Yeah.
I was, oh, okay, that's wrong, that control is failing, that's wrong. That means we've got a huge control failure over here, because I would put together all of the dots of a different thing. And
that's the instinctual side, seeing the patterns.
With a governance failure.
Yeah.
And I would not be afraid then to take that to the board audit committee of a very, very large organisation and say, we've actually got a problem at the top, not all these small things down the bottom. So when I was fascinated to read the results, and it made a lot of sense to me when I looked at my body of work and the various things that I've done over my career.
It's what you just said about being willing to go and say, hey, actually, we're focused on the wrong problem. We should be looking over here. That's actually, I'm so glad you brought that up for launch readers out there listening. Twofold. One is that's a huge risk taker trait, right? We're willing to, I'm a risk taker too. So we're willing to be uncomfortable. And sometimes that means just raising your hand and saying, I don't agree, right? When everybody else is heading in a different direction. But the other thing that I think is really powerful about that is when it comes to your connection to your work, your willingness to innovate, oftentimes that means stepping out into the place that other people haven't gone yet. And you obviously have done a very good job of that. So I give you a lot of credit for that, because I think it's important to bring that to engagement, because to loop it back to what you said in the beginning, I love how you framed that. We don't come to work and say, God, I feel so engaged today.
Just
amazing. right? No, we say, oh my God, I love my job. Yay, Sunday night. It's almost work.
Absolutely.
That's why this is a little bit of a soapbox, but I don't know if you have this in the UK as much, the whole Friday movement, it drives me bonkers because that to me says, I hate my job. And I'm thinking, well, then change it. Like what?
Yeah. I would say to people, I don't want to be in that world of thank God it's Friday.
Right.
I love Monday. I'm like SpongeBob SquarePants. I always say to people with small children, I'm ready. I'm just like, God, Monday's great.
Yeah, that's how I feel. So every time someone has a Friday t-shirt and they're all excited about it, I'm like, that's lame.
Yeah.
So I think I can't remember if it was Malcolm Gladwell, Seth Godin, it's one of those two, said something like, it told a story, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, about being on vacation and being up at 2 a.m, checking his email in the lobby of the hotel where he could get the Wi-Fi somewhere tropical. And, some people just rolled in from a club or something and had said how sad that he has to work while he was on vacation. And his thought was, how sad that you feel the need to take a vacation from your life.
Yes.
And I can't remember. Like I said, I might be totally botching up the story, but I think the point is the same. Like, how sad is Friday? Like, we should love what we spend most of our life doing.
Yeah. And I dislike this sort of slightly artificial divide between work and life. I mean, I hate the phrase work-life balance. It's all life. It's just something that we do with life, Yeah, it's all the same.
I would reach out and give you a big hug if I could for saying that, because I feel exactly the same way. And we spend so much of our time at work. We should love it. And it's part of everything. You're absolutely. And it's not like for most of us that we come home and like, okay, I don't think about that anymore. Done. Or when we go to work, we don't think about our personal stuff. It all goes together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where can people go to connect with you and learn more?
They go to www.engageforsuccess.org. And if you just Google Engage for Success, you'll find us very easily. You can join our newsletter, which means that we will keep you updated with all our new research and everything else, or just go and have a good old browse through the website because there is a ton of stuff there.
Excellent. The last question for you is, what's the one thing Launch Streeters should do today to drive engagement?
Go find people to say thank you to. It's the easiest thing that you can do. It acknowledges us as human beings. You can always find something to thank somebody for.
That is wonderful advice. Thank you, Cathy, so much for being on. I've taken copious notes, so I've learned a ton. Excellent. And I bet Launch Streeters have too.
Good.
So, what is your one takeaway from this interview? For me, it's how fitting in is actually killing innovation efforts. We try so hard, don't we, to fit into the culture that we're a part of? It reminded me of how important it is to give people room to be themselves. So instead of finding commonalities, I'm going to seek out differences in my team. What do you do? So here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to go to our website and have your team take the Innovation Quotient Edge assessment and then use their innovator archetype results to help them find the room to be unique. You will see innovation thrive when we all understand and then have room to be our best selves. In their uniquenesses is their strengths. Tamara out.
Thanks for hanging out with us inside Launch Street. When you're ready to take your game to the next level, join the thousands of others that are upping their innovation edge on GoToLaunchStreet.com, the top online education resource and community platform for innovators looking to use innovation to get measurable results. GoToLaunchStreet.com.